Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to hear that you have a Ministry of the Environment and Food, bringing those things together. I work at the Institute of the Public Health and the Environment, which is also bringing those things together. In public health, it includes food safety. But let's start with the risk-benefit. It's a broad area. What can you consider? RIVM had a quite famous report on risk-benefit produced in 2006, which tried to calculate the risk from chemicals and tried to calculate it based on the numbers of life years lost of chemical exposure. And they compared it to the life years lost based on unhealthy diets, too much salt, too much sugar, too much other things. And that was published in 2006, and it was quite an eye-opener. EFSA translated that report directly. We had colloquiums, we had European projects, but it shows the world how to put things in balance and how to put things into risk-benefit perspectives. There will be an update in 2017. They are integrating reports that will be based either on safe diets, and I will give an example in the next slide. It will be based on healthy diets, but it also will be now included sustainable diets. As we said, the sustainable goals are also there, and how to integrate those three different messages into a kind of integrated perspective, including some future perspectives on trends, either in the consumer science or in the innovation area, and how to do this. These reports will be published next year, the background reports as well as the integrated report. And this is just an example of the food safety. We do the exposure and the risk assessment based chemical by chemical. As said this morning, it's chemical by chemical. It's even sometimes food item by food item, not considering that we eat a whole diet altogether. But for this, we could not better for a long time, and we included large safety margin into the food safety concept that we have. But this is what we do at present, and the question is how to improve. We also have examples of sustainable diets. This is an example where colleagues of mine calculated how much CO2 equivalents are associated with your diet. And you can see that the majority of the CO2 equivalents come from meat and animal food items. And of course, this also has to do something with production. And if you look at the food safety again, I ask myself the questions, what about mixtures? Are they well addressed or not at all at the moment? What about endocrine effects? Do we understand the working mechanism, as we heard from Niels? It's a complicated story, but how are we going to address that in the future with the new chemicals, with the emerging ones? So, and then trying to bring that together in a kind of integrated policy where we are aiming at to advise the Dutch different ministries that deal with all those issues. And you can have different classes to look at the problem. And today we are looking, food safety and non-toxic environment is a very important one. But how does it affect the economical considerations, chemical producers, as we heard from Thomas, for example? Is there an incentive to go in that direction or not? How will it affect trade? For example, if we heard from Donald Trump that he is throwing away the TTIP negotiations because he wants to favor economy in America, the number of money that you have to do for testing, the number of money you have to do for enforcement and whatever, and how are we going then to trade with other parts of the world? That also relates to fair trade and food security. If we have high standards in Europe, how does the trade come from Africa? Will that not be allowed, that food on the market in Europe anymore? How does it affect food security? Will we have more uprising and wars in that part of the world? So it's not an easy question if you talk about risk-benefit, and you can continue for this for a whole afternoon. But what we are trying to do is say where those issues go hand in hand, there is no problem at all. You can just go and communicate about that to consumers. This is a good way to go. But what if they conflict? If there is conflicting evidence, where then to put your energy on, your budget on, and how to deal with those issues. And hopefully we have some ideas in the coming years on how to solve that. Some risk-benefit work is also done at the Danish Technical University, where I'm a guest professor, and we work closely together with Morten Poulsen, his department, on how healthy and how risky is our food. We do more cooperation with DTU, also in the nanomaterials, and nanomaterials are also something that are of concern in the environmental area. There, the safe by design principle is well recognized by now, and that's a good thing to know. And we believe in international cooperation from the member states' perspective as well. It's not that we only need international organizations for that. We should also bring in national initiatives closer to each other. Aggregated exposure, this is another big topic to deal. This is a slide I borrowed from colleagues working at the US EPA. They have a kind of framework. It was, I think, mentioned by you, Hans, that they have a kind of fair trade-off in environmental issues. What they do, they look at different chemicals come from production or from fires or waste sites or manufacturing. What are the media that those chemicals can contain? Cosmetics, air, soil. What is dermal exposure, inhalation, oral? And after all, we only have one body. It all comes in your body, either via the skin or via the inhalation or via the food. And this framework does not include food. It's only environmental exposure. And what if we integrate food? And therefore, it's good to have one ministry to integrate those things in Denmark, I think. Coming back to that, in the European project that we are doing at the moment, it's called the Euromix project. It's about mixtures, testing the mixture effect. It's coordinated by RFVM, myself. We have 22 partners, including the World Health Organization and EPA, America. And we try to set up a kind of framework for mixture testing and the new chemicals. How should we know that those chemicals contribute to a certain mixture effect? And for this, EFSA is also already working for 10 years on this issue in the pesticide area. It's pesticide food only. They had 4 opinions, and I think that Andreas will continue to talk about that. But that's a little bit a precautionary approach. Much is not known in science. We cannot know all the mixture effect by the models and the data that we have at hand today. So improvements are needed, and therefore the Euromix is there, including new techniques to measure those, including aggregated exposure pathways. It comes not only from food, it also comes from the air and other things. And this is just an example for bisphenol A. It can be in papers, in ink, it can be in contaminated soil, it can be in the air, it can be in the food, it can be in cosmetic products. And the question is, how often do people use those cosmetic products? How often do people eat food that can be contaminated with bisphenol A? How do they breathe their air? And how often does things happen? And for all this we have models, and most of them are web-based models, can be used by other countries. And then we can have a better view on how to balance those risks, and are there really risks associated by all the mixtures? And in Europe there's a tendency to group all the chemicals that affect an organ. So all the chemicals that affect your liver or your nervous system should be seen in the context of each other. And that's a big paradigm shift. We have to create new models. And this which is what we will do in Euromix. We start to test a large number of chemicals that potentially can affect your liver, a fatty liver effect, or an endocrine system. And we start with making use of chemistry. A molecule has a kind of structure, and you can look at the structure and you can predict its toxicity based on the structure. And there are databases, and you can do many chemicals a day. It's just computational toxicology. You don't and this produces a long list of chemicals that can potentially affect that endpoint. And if they are positive, giving a strong signal, you can test them with a bioassay toolbox. And we have 10 labs in the Euromix project that have different systems, cell lines, and you can include them in testing. But then at the end of the day, if you want to be sure about the testing, you have to compare it with the animal studies that we are doing now today. And there's also a societal need to reduce animal testing. And if you think about the millions and millions of combinations of chemicals that can form a mixture, how many animals do we need to test them all? There will be priority mixtures, and how to set that priority. But at the end of the day, you have to translate all this information into human system biology, so to say, to link that via bioinformatics and to see what comes out of it in breast milk, for example, as Neil said, or in the urine or in blood. And we try to combine that all in the Euromix project in a kind of concept which can be used as a kind of example how we can tackle these issues into the future. Yes, and we try to link that to epidemiological research to the extent possible. We also think that all those models should be web-based. We have a lot of models web-based. We have a strong computer department at RIVM because our computer capacity has been merged all over the country. The computer benefit from the other science like climatological services, and we put that on the web, and it's web-based and useful for everyone. I'm not going into the details on the circular economy, how to control all those things, because that has been said. Some challenges. There are society challenges that we have to face in the risk-benefit issues. If we go further testing, it should not only be hazard-based, and many hazard testing has been done by REACH, but we should also take into consideration exposure, which is not always done in the environmental science. We should try to think about all the routes of exposure, but the data is simply not there quite often. We should merge disciplines, toxicology and epidemiology in the future, and that has not been done so much until now. And of course, we also need to cooperate much more from the member state level. So thank you for your attention.